Welcome to FedScoopTV. I'm Camille Tootie, FedScoop's editorial director, and I'm sitting here with Hoot Thompson from NASA. Welcome.
Good morning.
Can you talk a little bit about your role at NASA? What do you do?
Yes, I work actually at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, and more specifically in the NCCS, which is the NASA Center for Climate Simulation. We run a very large HPC supercomputing cluster that runs long-range climate forecast models. Just to differentiate, there's weather, forecast, and climate. Weather is what it's doing outside, forecast is tomorrow, what it's going to do in the weekend, and climate is 20, 30, 50-year kinds of predictions, and that's more at the end of the spectrum that we're at. So my role there is I'm an architect looking at hardware, software technologies to improve that cluster and deliver as much computational horsepower to our scientists as possible.
Very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about open source. What are some of the trends in open source that you see?
Well, the clear trend is more and more adoption. Our cluster runs open source operating systems. The operating systems almost have gone exclusively open source, be it Red Hat, be it SUSE, be it CentOS, whatever distribution flavor of your choice. That has taken over in the last 10 years, and I don't see anything changing there. What's now coming through is more on the application side. Recently, within the last year, basically, we stood up a Hadoop MapReduce cluster, which is based on Apache open source Hadoop code. Then we're moving into looking at, we run MATLAB, which is a pay-for licensed software. Maybe we can run Octave, which is a near-like piece of software, and that's open source. And what I haven't used yet is the free word. Clearly in our budget climate, looking for products that have the capability but deliver the performance and at a downloadable free price, it's a hard scenario not to go with. In fact, we just made a big change. Usually any kind of cluster, you need some kind of scheduling software. We had a pay-for version of that, and we just recently did a trade study and moved to a product called Slurm, which again is open source. And by chance and by luck and by good fortune, whatever you want to call it, it is also maybe the technically superior product on the market right now. So not only are you getting good cost, you're getting high technology, good solutions from the open source community, because you got a world of developers literally out there upgrading it and trying to make it go faster, be more robust, or whatever the attribute you're looking for.
Talk a little bit about the security challenges. What are those in incorporating open source for federal agencies?
Well, that's an interesting question, and if you download an open source piece of software without a Red Hat or somebody in front of it, you've got to go through a vetting process, at least at our shop. Now, like I said before, we run a climate simulation supercomputer, so our data, for the most part, we're trying to get it out to the community, but we want our site to be secure because we don't want that data getting out before it's totally cooked and ready for general distribution. Plus, we don't want people breaking into our system and destroying our infrastructure, obviously. But so from a security perspective, if we get a piece of code in like Slurm, we have to vet it because that is not through a Red Hat, that is literally downloaded. But the interesting thing in my mind is if you buy open source software as a distribution from Red Hat, it's instant credibility. So it avoids that vetting process. So the security aspects are there, but it's interesting that if you have a third-party support infrastructure in front of it, that alleviates some of the security concerns right out of the gate.
Interesting. How does the way the government use open source different from how the private sector uses it?
Clearly my experience is more on the government side, but I will hesitate to guess, and I had a conversation with one of the lead people out at NASA to discuss the same question, just to get his take. I think it's more driven by your operational model than it is whether you're federal government or private sector. I think it's more, are you willing to be on the leading edge and take the capabilities that you can get with open source and maybe be more a little bit of a cowboy in terms of your operational construct to go open source? If you need that 24/7, 5 or 6 nines availability, support every time you pick up the phone, you're probably going to be more comfortable in a non-open source environment with your more traditional model. We're running a front edge HPC cluster, we're willing to take that chance and get the capability of that open source, even if it's a more bouncy ride along the way. So again, I think it's, can you take the bouncy ride, or are you comfortable being on the edge? I think you'll go open source whether you're federal government or not. If you need that comfort, you perhaps will choose a different solution. I think if you look at the big financial markets, they're running open source Linux on their clusters because literally time is money to them. If they can make a trade before the next brokerage house, it's important to them. So I think you'll see them on the Linux or the open source side of things as well.
Mm-hmm. Fast forward a few years, how do you see the use of open source adoption or use evolve over the years?
I think it's just more of the same. I think I think it'll broaden. More and more people will be adopting it and seeing the advantages of it. I think we'll see more companies rise up like Red Hat to let the open source community develop the code, and they'll take on the support side of it and the distribution side of it. Somewhat off the page here, I'm looking forward to when the desktop goes truly open source. That's I guess the holy grail or whatever you want to call it. A little personal victory is when I got my brother's kid to run a Linux on his laptop.
How old is he?
He was like 18, 19 at the time. And it was one of these situations where, gosh, this does everything that Windows or Apple, good products, do, but I just downloaded it and it goes. And it's not that different in experience, so why not? So I think we'll, right, like I said, it started in the supercomputers at the operating systems. We're seeing applications. I think as we push out and get to the desktop, and the desktop gets integrated with your iPads and your mobile devices, that'll be when we really won, if you will, in terms of open source taking over. And it'll be interesting to see how long that takes. If it even happens, it'll be interesting to watch.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with FedScoopTV. We appreciate it.
Thank you.